Great. All right, thank you everyone for coming, and terrific turnout on a nice winter evening. Welcome to Science on Tap. My name is Susan Knight. I work at University of Wisconsin Trout Lake Station. Thank you. Our co-sponsors here are the Minocqua Public Library and the Lakeland Badger chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, UW Trout Lake Station, and UW Kemp Natural Resources Station. So thank you, and of course our hosts that we are so grateful to, the Minocqua Brewing Company. Thank you so much. The purpose and organizational sort of details of Science on Tap is that we're trying to each month introduce a new science topic and get you some first-rate science that's going on either in the Northwoods or in Wisconsin or by researchers in Wisconsin and working throughout the world. We've had some great presentations recently. I want to make a note that we are doing live video streaming, and for those who cannot attend. So for those who are attending, that's kind of irrelevant, but another time, if you can't come, you can watch it on your own computer, and we've got that working pretty well. Also, it is live streaming over at the Minocqua Public Library, and so if you think it's going to be too full here or you'd like a different setting, go over and visit Mary Taylor over there, and you can watch it over there. Tonight, we're going to, we've got a big crowd. We'll probably take a short break at about 7:30 for about 5 minutes and allow everyone to maybe get another drink or whatever, and then we will come back and resume. When you leave tonight, please, if you haven't done so already, fill out a card or leave your email, and then we can give you a follow-up reminder of our next Science on Tap. Please print clearly so that we can tell the Z's from the 2's and the 1's from the L's, and that would be very helpful. Thank you. Our next event, just to tell you what's coming up, is April 2nd, and we are going to be talking about ticks and tick-borne diseases with a name that might be very familiar to many of you, with Dr. Phil Pelletieri from the UW Entomology Department, who is just retiring. He's often on the radio once a month with Larry Mueller. So he's going to talk about ticks. And in May, along with our usual May event, in June we have a special event. This is a first announcement of it. We're going to have a forum on mining in the Pinocchio Hills. This will not be here at the Minocqua Brewing Company, but it will be at the Campanile Center. It will be a different day. It'll be June 5th, which is a Thursday, and we will have more information on that next month. So you might just want to put it on your calendar, June 5th Mining Forum at the Campanile Center. Tonight we have Challenges Facing Northwoods Songbirds with Dr. Anna Pidgeon. Dr. Pidgeon is a professor in the Department of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Anna will share her latest research on emerging factors that may be impacting songbird numbers. The challenges are many, from changing climate, extreme weather events, to fluctuating insect populations and declining habitats. Anna's research seeks to better understand the relationships between birds and their environment. It's through such understanding that we can better focus our conservation efforts. Dr. Pidgeon also has a project going on in the Trout Lake area. She's looking at aquatic insects that spend part of their life in lakes before they emerge and become prey to insect-eating birds. I'd like to make a note that Dr. Pidgeon told me that her interest in the natural world goes back to her walk to and from school through a natural area. I want to emphasize that because how important it is for all of us to help children engage in the natural world at an early age and foster a love of nature. Now, some of you may recognize the name Anna Pidgeon even before you had heard of our speaker tonight. Our professor here spells her name with a D, P-I-D-G-E-O-N. But there's another famous Anna Pidgeon without the D. This is a fictitious Anna Pidgeon, the protagonist in many books by the author Nevada Barr. Maybe some of you know about her. She's written many books about crimes set in the national parks, including some up in Isle Royale. Our Anna pigeon here and Nevada bar actually crossed paths a couple of times. And as I understand it, Nevada bar appropriated Anna pigeon's name with the slight spelling difference. So I don't know how she feels about that, but it happened. So in some places, our Anna pigeon is better known as a fictitious park ranger than as a renowned bird researcher. Her name, Pigeon, has also led to some funny incidents, given that she studies birds. So which of these do you think is true? A, she has autographed many books by Nevada bar. She signed in for a tour at Carlsbad Caverns, gave her name, Anna Pigeon, to the ranger, and he said, "Yeah, right, and I'm Bill Clinton." Or C, while working with peregrine falcons in Minneapolis, the press, who were reporting on the effort, quickly focused on her name, Pigeon, since peregrines sometimes eat pigeons. Which do you think is true? All of the above. You're absolutely right. Please welcome Dr. Anna Pigeon.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Let's see. Maybe I'll try this. Is that better? So we're here to talk about songbirds tonight, and songbirds have a fancy Latin name, the order Passeriformes. How many birds do you think there are in the world? Anybody? How many different species? It's a little bit more than 100. Is that it? Species of birds. 800, 900. Anybody have other guesses? 8,600. Getting warmer.
10,000.
Okay. Well, there's a little bit more than 10,000 species of birds. And Passeriformes, the Latin word, or what we call songbirds, or more technically perching birds, make up about half of those. So about 5,000 songbirds, perching birds. And they range from the biggest, the common raven, to very small hummingbirds. So with that great diversity of species, there's an awful lot of niches occupied by birds, many different lifestyles, different strategies for making a living. Where in North America do you think the most Passeriformes or perching birds or songbirds are located? Where's the hot spots? Florida, California, Hawaii. Let's call it the 48 of the 48 states of North America. Let's say, not Hawaii. Oh, okay, now we're getting somewhere. So the Northern Appalachian region and northern Wisconsin are the hot spots for perching bird or Passeriformes or songbird diversity in this continent. So you're very blessed. It's the northern part of the state, a little bit less in north central Minnesota and adjacent Michigan as well. Okay, so recognize how blessed you are when they finally come back and start singing this spring. Down in Madison, cardinals are singing and chickadees are doing their teacher song, and so I know it's around the corner pretty soon. But and eagles are on eggs in the very southern part of the state, so it is on its way. Okay, so I'm charged with talking about challenges to our songbirds today, and I thought I would start with the broad and move to the more local. And so I do research at a number of different scales. I make use of data sets on birds that citizen scientists have collected across the country, and since the mid-1960s. So for some broad-scale questions, we have a time series that's more than 40 years old. And so we're able to ask questions about how did bird populations change in response to various things at that very broad countrywide scale. And one thing I've been looking at is climate and the effects of extreme events like hurricanes or drought or heat waves, and how they have changed abundances of birds through time. And we've found that it's relatively well, let's see. that heat waves and droughts have stronger effects in other parts of the country than here in the lake states. And so especially in the southwestern part of the country, birds are really hammered, especially if there are drought and heat wave in the breeding season. We see, especially, so when we look at then different groups of birds, how they make their living, for example, those species that nest on the ground versus those that nest in shrubs or trees, those that eat insects versus those that eat grain and other plant parts, we find that ground nesting species are the hardest hammered, so their abundances really decline. And you can imagine the hottest part of the profile from ground upward is right at the soil level. So species putting their eggs on the ground and needing to keep them cool, not incubate them, but also meet their own energy needs, have a lot of trouble doing that, and will forego breeding, or their eggs will become inviable because they have two bad trade-offs: go get food, which is hard to find when it's hot and dry, or try to keep their eggs cool. So in contrast to especially the southwestern ecoregion of the country, where we are here, we haven't found, we've modeled for like 100-year drought heat wave combination and haven't found nearly as dramatic effects. So that's good news for here. We have found, interestingly though, that when we look at the suitable climate space that various bird species are found in, we looked at about 200 different land bird species, and we found that the center of their range has been shifting over the last 60 years, so from 1950 to 2010. And for 200 bird species, there's shifts in all different directions, and rates of shift also vary quite a bit, but the average is about 1.2 kilometers per year. So over this 60-year period, that's about 70 kilometer shift. That probably isn't much, but it's a movement, and we don't know how long it's been happening, and we don't know how long it will continue. And the more important thing is we don't know whether the habitats that birds that are strongly affiliated with will track those changes. So it's easy enough for a bird with its high agility, ease of movement, to track that kind of rate of change. But for trees or other habitats, habitat elements, it's much harder. And then in terms of the direction that birds' suitable habitat is changing, it's all over the map, but the highest or the strongest directionality is toward the west, northwest, and north. So everybody seems to be shifting, or a higher number of species are shifting in those directions than in any other directions. So that's kind of interesting. It's not cataclysmic at this point, but raises concerns, especially when habitats reach barriers like developed area or agricultural area. How are things going to shift to be in their kind of best weather location? Keep it up. Okay. Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay. Sorry. Okay. And another thing I've looked at in Wisconsin specifically is what habitat looked like for some songbirds at the time that the General Land Survey was conducted, so 1850-ish. So when General Land Surveyors swept across the United States, they documented what tree species were at each mile point. They would record the 4 closest tree species and their diameter, and using that information, another professor, David Mladenoff, has reconstructed what's called pre-settlement tree composition was over the state. And then knowing what we know about the habitat requirements and affiliations of different songbird species, we were able to say here's where they're in high abundance or low abundance or not found at all currently. And here's what the habitat looks like, the tree species composition and size, and how the landscape is contiguous in big blocks or in very chopped up into small patches. And we're able to reconstruct what habitat quality would have been at that time, 1850, compared to these days. And we found for 3 species, pine warbler and Blackburnian warbler and black-throated green warbler, that there's been a shift to the northeast, a retraction of the range edge in that direction, and also lowering of habitat quality in general. So at 1850, there was a lot higher abundance of large trees, more hemlock in the landscape, and less chopped up landscape. And those 3 things are important. And then for pine warbler, there were bigger patches of large red and white pine, which are really important to them. So it's not that those 3 species aren't here, they certainly are anymore, but they're at a lot lower abundance, we think, than they were at the time, and they are in a smaller part of the state. Another challenge that I've looked at quite a bit is how housing development affects bird habitat quality. And it's not necessarily housing per se, but we have really good records because every 10 years there's a census with a long form that asks questions about the year that the house was built, and then we're able to track when houses go in and how long they're there and whether they're replaced. And so looking at the very broad scale of the United States, we've looked at areas that have been settled for a long time. For example, the East Coast forested area, and this is all work that's done in forests. And then areas that have been settled relatively recently, like the Rocky Mountain areas. And then areas that have been settled kind of an intermediate amount of time, like this Northwoods area. And when we look at, so rural areas in particular, I'm not talking about cities, we find that areas that have been settled longer have have a lot fewer bird species from the full possible complement of them. Areas that have been settled the least amount of time have a more full complement, and areas like this are intermediate. So the way these surveys are conducted, the data that we get this information from is there's a 25-mile long route, and every year well-qualified volunteer drives along that route and gets out of their car every half mile and records all the birds that they see and hear. And then in some cases that's been done since 1968 or so. In other places more recently than that. And so we look in a radius around that 25-mile route, and we every 10 years have an accurate picture of what's the housing density in the area. And so we can track the same locations through time, and we find that, again, looking at birds by their life history strategies, like ground nesting species, neotropical migrants, permanent residents, insect-eating species, we find, again, that ground nesting species are super sensitive to housing or to things related to housing. Neotropical migrants, those that travel long distances and also happen to be birds that forage on soft-bodied insects a lot, are super sensitive. Permanent residents are not. So chickadees, nuthatches, the rest of the birds that you're seeing at this time, brown creepers, etc., don't seem to be as sensitive. Short-distance migrants, those that spend their winters in the southern part of the U.S., like yellow rump warblers, and many of the blackbirds, they're not very sensitive to housing. And so it's not necessarily housing per se, but there are a lot of things that are associated with housing, like roads to service the housing, and bird feeders at the houses. And I don't know if these have positive or negative effects, but what do you see besides bird feeders at or what do you see besides birds at your bird feeders? Squirrels love baby birds and bird eggs. They are happy to make use of that protein. Even though you think of squirrels as eating acorns, they're constantly on the look, especially in breeding season for them, of these convenient protein packets that are baby birds or bird eggs. Other things that are associated with houses are dogs, cats, and for ground nesting birds especially, I know my dog is really efficient at finding birds on the ground and flushing turkeys, and I'm sure she gobbles up, if I would let her, be off leash, I should say, gobble up black and white warblers that are nesting on the ground here in the breeding season. Other things that are associated with houses and roads, again, it's not the roads per se, it's not that there's a lot of roadkill necessarily, but the making of edges, the corridors that are associated with roads is we like to walk on paths, but we're not the only ones. Mammalian predators like to use paths or forest edges to move through, and avian predators like crows and ravens and blue jays also make use of these corridors, either because they're open flight paths or as hunting perches. So all of those things combined seem to be what it is about housing that's causes a decline in birds. An interesting thing that we noted was in the decade of the 1970s, so it showed up in the 1980 census, there was something called the rural renaissance. There was a back to the land, back to the rural area movement where people moved into areas rich in amenities like beautiful forests and lakes and scenic vistas in mountain ecoregions. And we had seen this progression of declining numbers of species in response to increasing housing density. But at the 1980 census, there was a big spike here in the northern ecoregion, the northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and to a lesser extent in New England as well, which we think is attributable to that big housing boom of the 1970s. And then the negative association kind of eased up a little bit in the next decade, and then got bigger in the 1990s. So we love our being close to nature, and I don't live in the city myself. I live out in the country, and just couldn't manage to stay in the city. But we have to, but that love of nature and all of us having our own little patch seems to be contributing to making our bird community somewhat depauperate, losing species. Okay, sorry to be a downer there, but it's important to know. Okay, so another thing, challenges to our songbirds is pretty much a human activity story. And so another thing that I'm looking at is the effects of recreational trails on birds. And this study isn't in the Northwoods, but I think it's very applicable to the Northwoods. So I'm working in the Baraboo Hills, looking at trails of different types. Old logging roads that are now used for hiking, the constructed trails that are very narrow tread, about 18 inches, and then some pretend trails that we're using as controls. And we've found that some bird species, some flycatchers, Acadian flycatchers in particular, and rose-breasted grosbeaks, tend to put their nests further away from trails than close to trails, whereas other species, like wood thrush and robins, tend to put their nests close to trails. And then we've also found that nest success is much higher if you're farther away from trails. And so why is that? And does it have anything to do with the physical aspects of the trail, like how wide it is, because that lets, if it's a very wide trail, it lets in sunlight. There's high volume of vegetation growth responding to the sunlight. If it's a narrow trail width, you can't discern such a difference in vegetation. Or is it people using the trail? Is it the disturbance, if you're close to the trail, of constantly being flushed by people walking by? So we're trying to work out the answer to that question. My guess is that it's related to avian predators using the flight path of trails. And so probably narrower tread trails will make less of a convenient flight path for birds. So I think that's one way that we can mitigate that problem. And then finally, Susan mentioned that I have a study up in the lakes adjacent to Trout Lake, 3 different lakes, and looking at a specific group of songbirds, flycatchers. And whereas most songbirds look for caterpillars or other soft-bodied plant-sucking insects to feed their babies, flycatchers, which the way they hunt as adults is to perch on a branch and look for a flying insect to go by, and then they sally out and grab it, and they come back to the branch. Well, they feed their babies the same thing that they eat themselves, so flying adult insects. And there's a high abundance of those flying insects associated with lakes, mayflies, midges, and mosquitoes, and other species like that. So our question is, do the edges of lakes pack in higher density of flycatchers? Is it super high quality there because it's so rich in food being close to the lake, or not? And so, and then second part of that question, after we get the first part answered, will be, does development affect the quality? Because when people clear forests from in front of their yards, that actually allows insects to penetrate further into the forest. So it may have a positive effect in this case for this specific group of birds that fly, that makes its living in this way. So that's 4 different sets of challenges that I'm focusing on. And I think I will open it up to questions at this point. I've touched on several. I'm happy to go further into those if you would care, if you would like to. I didn't hear the question. What's the status of the Kirtlands Warbler in the state of Wisconsin? Expanding like crazy into the Central Sands area. I didn't look up numbers, but I bet somebody in the audience knows how many nesting pairs we had. Has anybody visited Kirtlands Warblers nests with the Natural Resources Foundation field trips? Okay. So, absolutely, that's true. So I'm sorry, I didn't give the context. So the point was, aren't they more recent arrivals? And yeah, I was assuming. Thank you for adding that. So Kirtlands Warbler is a super habitat-specific species that only uses jack pine when it's between about 5 years old and 20 years old. So kind of high, very dense jack pine. They put their nest on the forest floor or the ground underneath those jack pines. And you can imagine that that kind of habitat type doesn't, it's gone after 20 years. Jack pines typically live about 50 years and then naturally become decadent. They die, or they succumb to insect outbreak or fire, and that in a natural system without fire suppression, that puts patches of that habitat type on the landscape. But with our fire suppression, they were out of habitat over the last 50 years. And in the 1970s, we're down to just 200 pairs or so. And they were put on the endangered species list. And the Fish and Wildlife Service worked to create patches of that correct age class of jack pine. So it was a highly managed system. Now their population in Michigan, and so it's in the northern part of the lower peninsula that is their only breeding area, and it's all within 2 counties or so. So very, very small range. And their population got up to about 2,500 breeding pairs, and then there was no more, the habitat was full, so they started emigrating, and they emigrated to, probably widely, but we started noticing them in the central sands where there's also good jack pine habitat. And now there's something, and so that was very exciting to see them coming into Wisconsin in, about 5 years ago. And now we have maybe 10 breeding pairs, and it's being closely monitored by Fish and Wildlife Service. Okay, yes?
Has there been any predictions, or have you guys talked about what you think the effect will be on the bird population up there?
Well, the question was, with this very severe winter, what effect will there be on bird populations? And so the birds that are here, the songbirds that are here, are primarily gleaning insects from bark crevices. Those resources don't change with this cold winter. They might need more calories, so depends on the abundance of those bark insects, but I don't think that food availability is probably an issue for them. Birds like chickadees and nuthatches need a cavity to spend the night in to have higher probability of surviving through the night. And so if adequate cavities are available, they'll pile in 3, 4, or 5, up to 8 birds in one cavity to stay warm. So finding suitable, so having cavities of a wide variety of diameters is a really important thing for survival of species. And woodpeckers will do the same thing. They use a cavity at night to maintain their thermal balance. I mean, certainly feeding birds increases their potential for survival, and it brings birds in from a wide area to forage at the feeder all day long. And birds like both chickadees and nuthatches will cache seeds, so they'll come get a seed, take it away, come get it, take it away, and they'll put it aside and then use it later, and that increases their survival, absolutely. So what do I think about survival of birds? And I was thinking about grassland species, species like horned larks, maybe having a tougher time of it. They're not necessarily a Northwoods species, but they forage on the ground, and with the heavy snow cover, consistently heavy snow cover that we've had, that may limit their foraging resources. I don't know if you've had any situations where ice has covered the snow, so it's a strong crust. Okay, so then the grouse population probably has been just fine because there's lots of snow for them. They plummet into the snow and spend the night there and then burst out and give people heart attacks. And forage in mature aspen preferentially. So all of those resources are available.
What about the finches? I've seen many fewer.
Are you? Okay. So finches and crossbills, white-winged and crossbills, and pine grosbeaks are all species that are pretty eruptive, which means they move around a lot. They don't stay in a consistent area in the winter, and they follow cone crops. So you may not have a good cone crop. I haven't heard of any deaths. Another thing with finches, and this happens more toward the very end of the feeding, the winter bird feeding season. So in spring, there's sometimes fungus invades the seed that's left on the ground around feeders and causes deaths, but I don't think that's an issue yet because it hasn't been very warm. So I would say maybe your cone crop has been lower than usual, and so you have fewer finches for that reason. They're off in places with higher cone crop abundance. The question was, can salmonella be an issue?
We see a lot. We work at the Wildlife Center, and we see a lot of birds come in that have suspected salmonella.
And do you know what species? So this young woman works at the Wildlife Center and sees birds with salmonella coming in. Okay. Okay. Well, so if it's birds that use feeders like redpolls and other finches, it could be related to condensation inside. I have a hard time believing that, but I guess in the sunlight, in the sunlight, in feeders that are where the seed sits for a long time, that's a place where salmonella can develop. Yeah. Yes. Oop. Sorry. Let's take this person over here.
I'm wondering what the current status of our understanding is of neotropical migrants wintering and migration habitat, how that might be affecting the reproducing numbers instead of just housing density or road density, how other...
Yeah, so other phases of their life cycle, not just breeding season, but yeah, migration and winter and non-breeding season.
What's the status of current research on that?
Well, so what's the status of okay, so the entire question is, what's the status of research on the non-breeding phases of neotropical migrants' life related to their survival or population level? So answer is, we're learning a lot about where birds spend their non-breeding season and how they get there via the recent development of little tiny, what are called geolocators, that are sense the light angle and have a computer chip and a chronometer, and that's all they are, and they get attached to birds' sacrum, so they sit kind of over their hips, and birds wear them. They get caught in their breeding season and have a geolocator put on. It's just 3% of their weight. They go through a year and they come back to the same place to breed if they were successful, and they are caught again in a net and have that geolocator removed. And so that's a way that we're learning a lot about where birds go, what's their route, and where do they spend the non-breeding season. So that's an exciting area of research right now. It's been really hard for birds that weigh 30 grams or so to have something small enough to answer those kinds of questions. So it's we're filling in a lot of information. We're finding out that, for example, one thing that really amazed me was Swainson's thrushes in British Columbia, a western subspecies and what was called Intermountain West subspecies. The line of demarcation between those two is just, or birds that were on the west were wintering in California, and just 11 miles to the east, birds that were caught there were wintering in Colorado. So that strong a demarcation line designated kind of a very strict separation between subspecies of a population. I've put geolocators on gray catbirds in the Madison area because I was curious. We know that the mid-Atlantic population winters in Florida and Cuba, but we didn't know where the Midwestern population winters. And so what I found is that they seem to go down to Louisiana, cross the Gulf, and go into the Yucatan Peninsula. And so that's interesting as well. Some of the mid-Atlantics do that as well, but most of them stay to the east of that. So it gives us information about whether birds in different geographic areas have genetic or have mixing, population mixing at any point in their lives, or whether they stay quite separate. In terms of, so that helps us learn about migratory routes. In terms of migratory habitat, there is an initiative. There's a new bird and bat observatory along Lake Michigan, north of Milwaukee, that's devoted to monitoring migrants. There's new awareness of the importance of lake shore, like Great Lakes shoreline, for species, not only bird species, but dragonfly species, bat species, and bird species. And so the need, and so also increasing knowledge about the need for setting aside natural habitat in those areas. And often for birds, suitable habitat for migration, it just includes mature trees, big areas of flowering that insects are attracted to, where they have a big volume of that kind of habitat to forage in. Okay. Great question. So the question is, what can we do to mitigate the negative effects of housing? Yeah, okay. Yep, great. Yes, minimizing the sharpness of the edge to the natural forest or the natural habitat, whatever it is important. Planting native species is a great idea. Minimizing the amount of lawn. Keeping cats indoors, keeping dogs on leashes, or keeping cats in some kind of enclosure, zip line. Keeping trees that die, if at all possible, and logs that fall on the ground. Those are important foraging areas for birds. They're important nesting. Do you know brown creepers? This little bird that has a beautiful ringing sound. It has a super specialized nesting site, and that is, so a tree dies, and it's standing there, and eventually its bark starts to separate away. It's in that space between the bole of the tree, the wood of the tree, and the bark that's separating away that the brown creeper puts its nest. So that's a super specialized place. We need trees, dead trees, of all different kind of decay classes. Logs on the ground are important as runways for lots of small mammals, including shrews, etc. They serve as drumming logs for ruffed grouse. I'm not sure, I'm trying to come up with a way that they serve as foraging habitat for birds. I'm not coming up with that right now, but give me a little bit of time. But anyway, keeping that debris, so to speak, the coarse woody debris on the ground is an important thing you can do. Okay.
Yes, last several years, maybe 4 or 5 have had a great number of common redpolls in the winter. This year I have none. Do they change their migration patterns?
Common redpolls breed in the boreal forest, and as I mentioned, they move around in the non-breeding season when they're not tied to the nest in search of good spruce cone crops and sometimes pine cone crops, birch seed to eat. And so if your spruce and if the local area doesn't have high production or didn't have high production last summer of those things, they may just be in another area. Or it may be that the breeding season was a poor one in the part of the boreal forest where your redpolls came from in the last several years. It's hard to say. Yes, ma'am?
A couple questions. Following on his, we haven't seen any pine sisters either this year. And then I also wanted to ask, I have tons of goldfinch this year. Now, do they hide in the trees too, like the chickadees at night, to keep warm, or where do they go at night?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that question. I'm not sure where exactly they spend the night. Okay, the question was, pine siskins are absent, in line with the other finches. It's sounding more and more like maybe the cone crop has been low this year. Do you know that it has been low? Or less white spruce cone production this year. Okay, that's one partial answer. And where do goldfinches spend the night? They spend the night, I'm not sure where they spend the night. My educated guess, okay, so I once got to spend time with an infrared camera, somebody who had an infrared camera, and we took a walk at night and looked for all the warm bodies that were radiating that we could find. And in general, so I'm going to give you a general answer, they're just perched within the interior of the canopy. So I don't know. They're using the thermal cover. They're not out on the edges of trees, but they're using the thermal cover of volume, needle volume above them. So I would guess they're in conifer trees.
Okay, are warming houses worthwhile putting up here? Or are there just enough trees for them to have the birds to?
I don't think that they would use a structure because they don't use structures in any other phase of their life. So can we put up structures for birds? I mean, in general, goldfinches populations are doing very well. And if they found your feeder and they've made it this far, they probably don't need any help.
Okay, then one other, just following up somebody else about these dead trees on the ground. I've seen pileated woodpeckers picking at those little ants inside.
Why didn't I think of that? Sure, absolutely. So pileated woodpeckers go for the insects that make galleries through the ants, and yeah, the ants that make galleries in the downed logs, and absolutely, it's great foraging habitat for them. And flickers, they'll make use of the ground to get ants. So flickers kind of specialize on ants wherever they're found, whether it's on the ground or in woody debris like that. Great.
Red-bellied woodpeckers moving further north?
Red-bellied woodpecker populations are expanding, yes, and yes, moving north.
Seen them till this year.
Really? Okay, yeah. Yeah. So they're a strong component of the southern Wisconsin ecosystem, and yeah, they're booming. They get along very well in the mature trees of cities. Yeah, are well adapted to that. Yeah, ma'am.
I would like to entice orioles back in my yard in the spring. How will I do that?
Well, how do I entice orioles back into my yard in the spring? Make sure that you have a nice mature tree that they can put their pendulous nest in. So deciduous trees especially. And then you can put grape jelly out. You can put orange halves cut open on a nail out. And it's a hit or miss prospect. But those, sweet things like that is what will attract them. Yeah. Ma'am?
How's the health of our loon population?
So Mike Meyer was here speaking about loons 3 or 4 months ago, and I think our loon population mostly avoided the oil slick in the Gulf, but is declining from previous years. I don't have in my mind specific numbers for loons. I know that they suffer from challenges, broad challenges, including higher human use of lakes because they put their nests so close to the water's edge. So wave action caused by boats is a big problem, and that mercury is a big issue causing lower reproductive success for them. So they're certainly declining. When in the 1850s there were loons nesting as far as northern Illinois and into Iowa, and they've retreated northward and northward, in large part in association with as water clarity declines, they retreat northward to areas of higher water quality. So they're not in any near-term danger, but they've certainly declined in density relative to what they were. So the order Passeriformes, these 5,000 or so birds, are grouped according to by some characteristics that include their pellet structure, their sperm shape, and genetic closeness. And they all, so the perching, the mechanics of their feet, they all perch on something. So they all grip branches. That's different from birds that have palmate, or think of ducks and their foot type. No, it's not. That's true, they do. So it's not very well named. I'll grant you that. And the songbird common name also isn't necessarily great, because there are some that have complex syrinxes that they make vocalizations with. I mean, super complex, where they can have a duet with themselves, like veeries. So those are the oscines. They have, yeah. And then there's the birds that have very simple vocalizations that are still called songbirds, but they just think of a common nighthawk. It just says beep, beep. So they're very simple, similar to that. Okay, but the three things that I mentioned before are how they're classified.
Where do you classify turkeys?
Turkeys are galliforms. So nope, they're not songbirds. That's true, they do. I'm sorry, taxonomy is hard to explain, but the one characteristic that all the birds that turkeys are grouped with are this bill that's very down-curved, very strong, robust legs. That they tend to be walking birds, and they don't fly long distances. So songbirds include some of the longest distance flyers. Not necessarily all of them. Some of them are residents, but certainly no galliformes are long distance flyers. They tend to be resident and fairly sedentary, walk their way up the state. Yes, ma'am.
Are you working on the Songbird App that somebody at the University of Wisconsin is doing, and what's taking so long?
Mark Barris, I'm happy to say, it's not me, is working on the Songbird App. He teaches ornithology in the zoology department, and I don't know the answer to why it's taking so long. It's a good question. Yeah, I heard great things of it.
Do they have dialects?
Yes, birds in different regions of the country have different dialects, and so when you're learning, if you order a CD or DVD of songbirds and you get it from birds that were recorded, say at Sapsucker Woods, where Cornell's Bird Lab of Ornithology is located, and you memorize just that set, it may be somewhat different, or it may sound like the birds that you're hearing here in northern Wisconsin are a little bit off, and it's because of the different dialects. Absolutely. Yep. Yep.
What do birds do for water at this time of the year, and is it beneficial to give them water?
The question was, what do birds do for water at this time of the year, and does it help them to give them water? That's a great question, and water is a limiting resource for them, and they are great observers and find just the smallest little places where it's melted on the, against a dark surface, for example, and use that. But it's very helpful to them to put out water. So these heated bird baths are a great thing to put out, and even it's more limiting than food is for many birds. So it will attract a huge range of species, and not just those that eat seeds. Yeah, it's a good thing to do. Mm-hmm.
I know in the past few years or so, there's been more of an increase in windfarms. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on if they were a really big cause in migratory bird mortality, or they're not really that bad. I've heard kind of both. Do you have any thoughts?
The jury is still out. Yeah, and the question was, are wind farms a detriment to birds or not so bad? Are they neutral? And both wind farms and solar farms have certainly caused mortality. Have they caused mortality that would threaten the population? I don't think so far. I mean, in the Southwest, there's huge concern for California condors, for golden eagles, species that have great big ranges, and their populations aren't so big, especially the condors. I know that there's evidence that especially birds like swallows that fly close to the ground when they're foraging for insects have been burned by these solar arrays and ended up with their wings singed and unable to fly. But that's individuals, so do we, thinking about the life of one individual, and they've been brought into rehab, but certainly I'm sure there were many that were not found. Anyway, we have to balance. There's a lot of hard questions that we need to balance, I guess, is the answer. And in siting wind farms, not in the early wind farm installations, but more recently, a lot of attention is given to both migratory birds and bats, and attention is given to where breeding areas are. So it seems like now close to due diligence, if not full due diligence, is being done. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You talked about housing and subsequent roads and different width of trails having an impact on the movement and direction. Is there any correlation at all or any study being done with the motorized trails for snowmobiles, ATVs that are moving? Does it have any impact?
I don't know the answer. To my knowledge, nobody has looked at motorized trails. I don't know. But I think if we looked, we'd find something. I think it's about the physical structure of the trail, and certainly those are wider trails, and the impact on predator use of those. And I don't think that motorized trails are different than hiking trails in that regard. That's just my thought.
During the migratory times, they set portions of them down to alleviate any bird problems.
Great comment. And I guess I did hear that now that you mention it. So the gentleman mentioned that wind farms along coasts, which are used heavily for migration, are shut down during high migratory periods for shorebirds. Yeah. Yes, sir.
If you travel south of Madison, all you see is that monoculture of corn forever. What do the poor Wisconsin birds do when they migrate?
The question was, when birds come out of our tree-rich state and head down across the agricultural area, how do they manage? Where do they find anything to eat? On migration, birds are happy to, on migration they're looking for mature trees and patches of natural habitat, and that's what they use.
Essentially no trees, and in the old days at least they'd leave a little patch or a strip between
yeah.
one individual and another, but that is entirely gone. It's just one monoculture of corn as far as you can see, let alone pesticides and whatever.
It's true that farming practices have really reduced the hedgerows, and so where there's trees left are in cities, in yards, and parks.
On rivers.
On rivers, yep. Yeah, you're right. It's a much reduced area than prior to development. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would be curious to know, what is your favorite songbird and why?
I don't have. I have so many favorites. I can't name them all. I love nighthawks, and I love to see them show up in the. It's not a songbird, but I love to see them show up in the spring, and it makes me really sad to see them leave in the fall, just because they're harbingers of summer and of the change of the season. Yeah, I don't have a favorite. They're all really interesting. Yeah.
So I'll play devil's advocate. What
Well, I don't have a bird feeder because I live next to a cornfield, and I don't want to encourage the house sparrows and the starlings that live across the cornfield at the farm, at the dairy farm. So I would say I really get excited when I see evidence of high ecological integrity, so the full complement of birds that I know are native to a region, and not so excited when I see a lot of birds that that came from other places that people released here and don't belong here, so to speak.
Anna, how serious are brown-headed cowbirds and threat to our songbird population here in the Northwoods?
The question was, how serious a threat are brown-headed cowbirds to our songbird population here in the Northwoods? How many people have found brown-headed cowbirds at your feeders in the summer? Okay, so they're not nearly as big a threat to the Northwoods birds as to areas that have higher agriculture, because there's just not as high abundance of them. But I saw 5 hands go up, so they're certainly distributed around through the Northwoods. And brown-headed cowbirds will feed at feeders. They'll also feed on lawns. They'll feed in horse pastures. Wherever there are large herbivores like cows or horses. They're a big threat to songbirds, especially smaller songbirds, not robins, not so much orioles, but birds smaller than that, because in the eastern forest, because birds in the eastern forest didn't evolve with brown-headed cowbirds, and so they're naive to the wily ways of brown-headed cowbirds who lay their eggs in other birds' nests. And whereas in the west, some birds have evolved strategies for mitigating the effect of having brown-headed cowbird eggs laid in their nest, like the western race of yellow warblers will lay another floor of their nest on top of brown-headed cowbird eggs and their own eggs as well, and start over again, so that I've seen a nest that was like this tall. So a layer of eggs, a floor, a new floor, a layer of eggs, a new floor, a layer of eggs, a new floor. So that's one way that they mitigate. And other birds will abandon their nesting attempt and abandon those eggs and then go make a new nesting attempt. Birds that are big enough will push the eggs out or stab them and toss them out. They're called egg ejectors. But for the smallest birds, they're helpless against those eggs, and the parents end up raising the brown-headed cowbird egg, and maybe their own baby or maybe not, but certainly a reduced number of their own young. And so it decreases their reproductive success. Brown-headed cowbirds are bigger than most hosts, and they can yell louder, and they can stretch their necks up higher, and so they get more of the food. And if it's a high food abundance year, then they may be successful in raising their own young as well, but if it's not, then their young are sacrificed. So I'd be interested to know how many brown-headed cowbirds are recorded on breeding bird survey routes. I'm not sure in the Northwoods. Yes?
Yes, I'm looking at wrens that have whippoorwill on their leg. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, but I read that their numbers are really endangered.
I heard you say, I'm not sure what you said. You said wren and whippoorwill? You have a whippoorwill?
No, friends of mine have a whippoorwill on their leg.
Wow.
But I've never heard one. Are they actually endangered?
They're not listed under the Endangered Species Act, but their numbers have been plummeting, it's true, throughout the state. And so they are related to nighthawks in that they nest on the ground, and they're aerial insectivores, so they're flying through the air with their wide mouths, catching insects, catching kind of midge and mosquito-sized insects. And both the ground nesting, they also nest in fairly open stands, pines, drier stands like, savanna in the south, but equivalently kind of open pine, dryish sites in the north. And there aren't so many of those. So yeah, they're quite rare in the state. You're really lucky to see them. Keep the dogs away. Yeah. Yep, they are.
Folks, I'm going to interrupt just for a moment. And could I have a quick show of hands of how many people still have questions for our speaker? Do we have a lot more? Okay, we'll just keep going then. Go ahead.
Okay.
Are there any ongoing studies on whippoorwill in the state?
I'm not familiar with all the research going on in the state, but I cannot think of any right now. There's the DNR has a citizen science program where they monitor birds. So there's an owl survey, there's a red-shouldered hawk survey, and there's I think along with the owl survey, they're also looking for whippoorwills. So there's, as of maybe 6 years ago, we're starting to monitor them in a standardized way across the state. So that's as much as there is. Yes, sir.
Evening grosbeak population. I haven't seen them for quite a while. I know some people do. I'm just curious as to what they're doing.
So the question is, what's the status or what's going on with evening grosbeak populations? And they are a species that kind of just dips into northern Wisconsin, tends to nest in further north from here, have their higher abundance in boreal or conifer-dominated areas. And I'm not sure, so the data sets that I use to look at birds, they are kind of just on the edge of where that data surveys from. And to my knowledge, they're not in any particular trouble. They're holding their own, but I don't have specific information about them.
Which is the first songbird to nest? And I was just wondering, the weather we're having now, breeding triggers or breeding behaviors triggers that we need to be related to.
The question is, what is the first songbird to nest? And that's a great question. So the birds that are here are already permanent residents, are able to take advantage of suitable weather sooner than any others. And so that includes all those that you see at your feeders, unless they're visitors from the north, like juncos or some of the finches that have been mentioned. And so they start nesting quite soon. Cavity nesting species like chickadees, white-breasted nuthatches, red-breasted nuthatches, and brown creepers. And the birds that start nesting next are short-distance migrants, and maybe the most well-known of those is the yellow rump warbler. So they just go south far enough, or into the kind of Carolinas, Kentucky, Arkansas area, and they eat fruits that have a waxy coating, wax myrtle, and so they arrive fairly soon. But they need a good source of food for their babies, insects, in order to nest. So they arrive soon, or relatively early, but then they kind of wait around for temperatures to warm up. But they're still fairly early. Of any of the migrants, they're the earliest. And then the latest include those that travel from long distances. So central Mexico and further south. The latest to arrive are the flycatchers, like the yellow-bellied, great-crested flycatcher is among the latest, and then of course the nighthawk. Yep.
How is the timing of insect hatching and birds arriving? With climate change, birds arrive earlier and then insects are now?
So the question is, how is the timing of birds arriving and insects hatching? It's the traditional thought is that birds time their the hatch of their young to be just when there's peak insect abundance, peak caterpillar abundance in particular, and the trigger for long-distance migrants to begin their migration is photoperiod, and that doesn't change with climate change. So birds that are closer, that are migrating from closer or don't migrate at all, can have been adjusting their breeding season earlier to take advantage of the earlier warm-up in general. And so species like chickadees and even yellow-rumped warblers are nesting earlier, but species like blackburnians or black-throated greens or those that great-crested flycatchers, they're not nesting earlier. And so there's a lot of variability in the system, but in general, a study in Great Britain has shown that the mismatch is getting bigger. And so birds that are have kind of a southern distribution in Great Britain, the edge of the population on the north has higher reproduction than the edge of the population on the south, because over the north-south gradient, the birds on the north are better timed with their, the climate change isn't as rapid on the north edge. So on the south, there's a bigger mismatch. So yeah, it's a real question and a real problem, and it shifts the balance between resident species and migrant species, giving migrants or giving residents an advantage. I mean, both because they're subsidized in the winter by feeding, and because they have an earlier start, they can time the reproductive effort better to the insect availability. I mean, they also have the advantage of not having the long migration. So who kind of wins or how relative abundances of populations will shift is a open question with many different variables that will contribute to answering that.
Any more questions? Okay. Okay, any more questions? Great, all right. Thanks so much, Dr. Anna Pidgeon. It was great to have you here. Thanks so much to the Minocqua Brewing Company and to our other sponsors, the Lakeland Badger Chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, Kemp Natural Resources Station, Public Library, and Trout Lake Station. Remember, our next Science on Tap is April 2nd, Ticks and Tick-Borne Diseases, and with Dr. Phil Pelletieri. Thanks again to Dr. Pidgeon, and sign up for email reminders, and thank you all, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.